Hi, I'm Salika Ducksworth-Lawton, and this is Conversations in Color, where we have conversations about difficult topics with the 3 H's: humanity, humility, and honesty. And I want to thank our sponsors, Shift, where we are, the Pablo at the Confluence, University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, Converge Radio, and my organization, Uniting Bridges. Today we'll be talking about music, interracialism, Black History Month, and whatever Joel and I have come to our heads. Stay tuned, hold on to your hats and glasses. It's gonna be a ride. Welcome.
Me sing, me say, raise up your love right and not wrong. That's how you find a true champion. And everybody come make we get along. And everybody come make we get along.
So tonight, I'm Salika Ducksworth-Lawton. You know, some other days I might not be Salika Ducksworth-Lawton. But I'm here, one of the co-founders of Conversations in Color, with my good friend, compatriot, and you know, sometimes fellow troublemaker, Dr. Joel Pache, who is a full professor of English at UW-Eau Claire, but he's a man of many hats. He's been in the Volume 1 Best Teachers of the Valley Award more than once, I think. He teaches British literature with an Oxford degree, but he also teaches hip hop and Prince. He is the lead singer and one of the songwriters for Irie Soul. So you may have seen him jumping off a table, wandering around, or getting people to dance at Juneteenth, or this year's Martin Luther King. He's also a lead singer and songwriter with Eggplant Heroes, who you've probably seen around town, which is blues, jazz, and a little bit of whatever they throw in the kitchen sink. But Joel is also a fixture in the Minneapolis scene. He's mentored many students here, both at the graduate level and the undergraduate level. So it's Black History Month, and we want to talk about music, interracialism, and Black History Month with Joel. But we want to do it within the ethos of Conversations in Color, which is honesty, humility, and humanity. We are looking for ways to bridge race. We don't look for people to have a scream fest. And one of the best ways we can bridge race and talk about really difficult topics is to have honest, open conversations. So welcome, Joel. So happy to have you here.
Salika, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so happy and honored to be with you. And thanks so much for that really kind introduction. I've been looking forward to getting a chance to sit down and talk about music with you. So this is great. Here we are in a cafe talking about music. Dreams come true. Happy to be here.
I'm so happy you're here. Now, last year, or was it the year before, we were on Converge Radio, and you and I curated a list of Prince songs to talk about how Prince brought people together and the interracialism of Prince, but also the idea that Prince expanded definitions of masculinity, not just for Black men, but for all men. And Prince pushed an idea of, androgyny.
Yes.
Asked people to rethink what the limits of gender was and blurring those limits of gender. Now, I know you've taught a Prince class since then. What do you think Prince would be thinking about, or any of these artists that we've studied in the past would be thinking about where we are today and what we need today?
Great question, Salika. And I look forward to hearing what you have to say about Prince and masculinity. And thank you for speaking in that topic on my Prince class. I'm thinking of Prince at the Grammy when he was introducing a Grammy Award, and he said, like Black Lives, albums still matter. And I think Prince certainly today would be at the forefront, as he was, of these discussions, open discussions about race, about non-binary and genderqueer identity, about music as a way to transcend these fixities, these binaries, these things that seem locked, and then suddenly the music can go places where it can go into interstitial spaces, it can go beyond segregated spaces. And I think Prince today would want us to remember his vision of Uptown in Minneapolis, which is both, a real place and a fictitious place for Prince, of racial harmony, and that notion of harmony is so important in music, the building of chords and that each part is integral. I think Prince would want to remind us that we're all a part of this chord, and the chord doesn't sound the same if we're all not using our voices together harmoniously.
Well, that's the way he built his bands. I mean, wasn't that the reason why he built his bands the way they did? I mean, and going beyond Purple Rain, going beyond Raspberry Beret, going beyond Seven, he had this vision of music as a bridge, but he also had this vision of a place where a man could wear high heels and eyeliner and no one would question his masculinity. Is that something we really need today? Because it feels like there's a backlash to the ideas that Prince and maybe Stevie Wonder, today maybe Music Soul Child, some of the others who, they have a vision of an expansive masculinity. And it feels like there are people who really want, either through their music or through their attacks on LGBTQA literature, all of this, that they want to push people into very, very narrow boxes. I mean, how would we be able to use Prince and artists like him, Irie Soul and artists like your band, and able to bridge the gap with those people who are frightened by what's outside of their boxes? How do we reach them?
It's a great question, Salika, and I wish I had an answer. I can only kind of theorize because I love the question, and I think of music as that thing that even when you are alone reminds you that you're not alone in being alone. Mm-hmm. A great line from Sting's Message in a Bottle, I'm not alone in being alone, but that idea that if you're feeling alone, if any aspects of one's identity make them feel alone, that there are other artists out there who have traveled similar paths, and they're there as kind of road signs and guideposts to us. And I think about transit and music and the ideas and metaphors of motion and walking and travel in music. And so, as you say, talking about bridges, there are spaces here and there are interstitial spaces and bridges that span them. And I love how in music there's a bridge, as James says, take me to the bridge. There's there are the verses, the chorus, there's a bridge. And for me, that bridge is beyond metaphor. It's something it's meta-8. It's something that opens a gate and helps us access even aspects of our own selves perhaps we were unaware of or too afraid to let shine. Prince has, of course, right near Paisley Park, the little bridge which is now a graffiti bridge and been graffitied over. But that idea of a bridge, I think, as you point out, is so crucial. And as you mentioned, I've got product placement here today. I wore the right hoodie for this discussion. But Prince, combining the masculine and feminine symbols in his glyph, the love glyph, and also as a trumpet player, and Irie Soul pointed out to me, there's a trumpet, there's a horn. So kind of sounding this horn as a kind of clarion call to us all to be our authentic selves is one thing Prince was unabashedly.
Well,
right?
that symbol was him being his authentic self and rejecting commercialism. You know, trying to free himself from the record companies and the record deals in many ways. I think of Prince, I think of Sting. I think of a lot of the artists of the 80s and 90s, which you know, we think of like 1988 to 1992 as almost a transitional set of years. And I think of Sting's The Russians, and talking about he hopes the Russians love their children too, in an age where we worried that World War III was right around the corner. Mm-hmm. You know, and I think of Prince talking about the needs of people for peace and the needs of people to come together. And I wonder if we can think a little bit about these song lyrics as these artists being this extension of the civil rights movement in that way. Because people always want to say that the civil rights movement foundered in the 80s, but what really happened is that it appeared that it moved from the reverends and the politicians, and it moved into Public Enemy, and it moved into Prince, and it moved into Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. You know, I think, but I mean, I think of white artists. I think of U2. I think of U2 singing One with Mary J. Blige. I think of George Michael singing Freedom, or singing As, again with Mary J. Blige. Okay, maybe I've got Mary J. Blige on the brain. But I think of some of her songs and music. Which artists would you see today or then really talking about these bridges that we need to build, or using their lyrics, or using the way they push the music, or the sound to build bridges for us? Because I mean, Prince, Michael Jackson, although he is a problematic figure now, Stevie Wonder always was, Marvin Gaye always was. Jay-Z and Beyonce, I think, are trying to be that model today in some ways. Some of the collaborations Rihanna has done today feel like she's reaching out to try to help people see that what's on their screen can be what's in front of them. Who would you see as like that?
I'd like to just say what you said, Salika, and end it there. I love everything you said. That was beautifully comprehensive, and yeah, I like that we're fastening on this theme of the bridge and how you take us back to the 80s and also to civil rights. And I think of and religion. You mentioned the preachers and how that came into Public Enemy with Chuck D and other artists. And right, this idea of, in music, all the way back to jazz and to spirituals, of a call and response is in and of itself participatory and democratic and requires this beautiful back and forth, which is a lesson in harmony and the three H's right in its very form. And jazz folks, I just heard a cellist and a sax player trading fours recently in the cities. And the idea of trading fours, like the notion of trading, and that we're kind of going back and forth and giving each other measures. At its heart, like the bridge in music, these things that are part and parcel of the musical forms are in and of themselves about harmony, about coming together, about unity. And that's exciting to me. With the artists, I think of Marvin Gaye and his unification and calls to everyone by saying, who are they to judge us simply because our hair is long, where he's purposely reaching out to hippies and to others to kind of bring them in. I think of Bob Marley, of course, of One Love, and the bridge there of everyone coming together, directly spiritual for Bob. And also of Bob Marley's punky reggae party with the Meditations, who played just next door from Shift, where we are in Eau Claire, who played at the Metro and at the Plus. And the Meditations, that was their break on punky reggae party. But Bob wanted to acknowledge the punks on the London scene and say, hey, punk rockers. He could see that they were with him for the cause, and he wanted some way to musically tip his hat to them, to welcome them. And those gestures in music are really beautiful, like that New York City scene where the punk rockers and the hip hoppers were hanging out, and the kind of Beastie Boys, and so many sounds come out of that New York scene.
You had, I'm thinking Bring the Noise, which wasn't that Public Enemy and The Clash? I'm probably wrong about who the metal band was, but we've seen the rap metal collaborations in the past. We've seen, I think of Disturbed and the way they invert sounds of silence. And all of that music that does that is based on the clave, which is the 5-on-4, which we get from the combination in Louisiana of slaves from Nigeria and Ghana and Benin and Sierra Leone, matching their beat to the Choctaw and the Chickasaw Indians. So where I'm from, the 5-on-4 is the beat of Mardi Gras. It's boom, 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 dun, 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 la, dun, da, boom, 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 boom. But you hear the clave in metal.
Yes.
You hear the clave in punk. You hear the clave very strongly in rap, and you hear it incredibly strongly in hip hop. We have these artists today bringing these things together and making something new, and especially in Minneapolis, because Minneapolis was the heart of this new Civil Rights 2.0. And they were the ones who reclaimed the song Lean on Me, bringing reggae and R&B and punk and clave together in the streets in 2020, fighting to get justice for George Floyd. Who do you see in this new time as being the artists who are going to help us move forward? Who are you watching? Who are you listening to?
There are a lot of exciting new artists out there, and it's mind-blowing how gifted they are. And in this new time, I think Lil Baby's The Bigger Picture and leaning into the moment with George Floyd as a way to discuss and build bridges in his lyrics. And he addresses kind of multiple perspectives in his lyrics. Kendrick Lamar, who I would love to speak with Ben about in Compton, because Kendrick Lamar for me is really talking about questions of race and class. And there is, back to what you were saying about Prince, there's a vulnerability in Kendrick Lamar that's a little different from NWA with regards to masculinity. I'm very excited about Kendrick Lamar's work. I also think there's a lot happening across genres, which is interesting to hear. There's some return of rap and guitars now with newer artists. JPEG Mafia is doing experimental stuff. I also think we have to tune ourselves to the brand new artists and the directions they're coming from and the multiple directions they're leaving from. First Avenue was a bus station originally where Prince recorded Purple Rain. And I think now with these new artists, it's so exciting because there's so many different departures taking place and so many different things coming in. But those are a couple of the artists. J. Cole and Vulnerability is very exciting to me. And although this artist goes back, it's over 20 years since the Miseducation, I think some of these artists are still speaking to us, even though they're no longer the most recent artists. But I think Lauryn Hill, for instance, we still haven't fully caught up to the beauty of Lauryn Hill's message and the kind of Afrocentricity of her message. There's so much happening with Lauryn that I think the newer generation is picking up on, but I still see her, even though she's an artist from back in the day, that she has a lot to say still.
I think some of my students are still listening to A Rose is Still a Rose, listening to The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. I know some of them are still listening to Stevie Wonder. But one of the artists who has been pushing me has been Gary Clark Jr. And his song This Land, and I don't know if you've seen the video, where he has the children standing on the Confederate flags, where they kill the cottonmouth, and where he shows the cosmos in the child. I think that Gary Clark Jr. is talking about that rural Southern Black person who no longer wants the civil rights movement's respectability and making people feel comfortable. When he's singing that I'm just eating because I'm hungry and telling his neighbor I bought this land, that's really this declaration of power. And I see that in Kendrick Lamar's work for Black Panther. My husband would say, "Pray for Me" is like my theme song. But what worries me a little bit is that I also see the hints of Black nationalism in Kendrick Lamar and some of the separation. And a little bit of it in Gary Clark Jr., even though he's retaking blues and melding that blues with rock and retaking it for a really incredibly new sound. It's the artists that, the artists that you're talking about are the ones I think are pushing interracialism. But I see these older artists coming back. And they're the ones who really seem to feel that it's important. And I don't know if you've seen this, but I do see these people on the left and the right who really are questioning integration and questioning why do we want to be together. I mean, I see Dr. Umar Johnson on one side. A whole host of white nationalists. Can I start with Steve Bannon? Just we've seen this on display. How can we get people to understand, even besides the music, even besides everything else, through literature, through art, through music, through something, that we have to be together? We cannot be separate off in black space, in white space, in Asian space, in indigenous space. Because if we're in those spaces, people can drop bombs on us and the others can't see. How do you feel that you use these tools of art that you have to try to help people to see this?
Through listening to folks like you, Salika, and
you have some songs with Irisol that speak to this.
Yes, and as Junior would say, who came from Jamaica and lives in Eau Claire and founded Irisol with Kevin Zappa, that dance hall rhythm is a heartbeat, and that we have all of us this one love, one heart, as Bob says, and there's something about music where it gets around any of the blockades people can put up, and it mainlines to the heart, almost like a transfusion in a sense, and that gives me hope, and always education, always as a way that we're always learning, and through artists, through lyrics, we can learn so much through songs like Sister Rosa that teach us about Rosa Parks, through great artists, and that root of the word education and to lead out of, and this idea that education can lead us out of the mess we're in, and that e pluribus unum, out of many one, and getting towards that sense of unity. But music and education and literature give me hope, and I look way far back to the origins of this nation, and someone like Phyllis Wheatley, who was taking 18th century forms and the rhythms of iambic pentameter and that almost horse hoof clip-clop rhythm, and adding syncopation and African rhythms to it to subtly accentuate different parts of her identity, because she couldn't speak openly. At the time, she wasn't even published in America. The Americans, the people in power wouldn't publish her. The British, although she's very much writing about George Washington and pro-American sentiments during the Revolution, she's published out of London. But her use of rhythm and meter, like my favorite artists' use of rhythm and meter, and the cadences of their rhymes, in the syncopated drum beats of hip-hop, soul, funk, in that one drop of reggae, or the weak beat becoming the strong beat in reggae, that whole subversive sense of how music can subtly be a revolution. In Lauryn Hill's Everything is Everything, the video, the record, literally is a revolution. It's spinning. And those revolutions that the Beatles say we want, they're happening musically. And that, to me, is brings me hope.
Have you ever, and I know at your shows, sometimes you will have people just hand you poetry and pick a page and have you improvise to the page of poetry, the page of writing. Have you ever had the urge to do that to Claude McKay's If I Must Die? Because that's a poem that, here we have a man who's Jamaican, and he's writing for a Black American artist about how Black men should face the lynch mob. But it's adapted by the British Army in World War I and II as their poem for how they must face the Germans. You know, and it's sliding back and forth into these spaces. And I'm not going to say it's appropriated, because Jamaica is both British and diaspora. But have you ever wished to to sing one of those kinds of poems, what would you put under it? What kind of beat would you put under that?
Yeah, I would love to, and I think all the time of the musicality of verse, and even in the way we speak, the idea of accents and syllables. There are rhythms that we're speaking in, and we're speaking in drum beats, and that's thrilling. And looking at Claude McKay's poetry, at so many wonderful poets, it is musical to me. And even the punctuation are like musical notations of fermatas and pauses and whole note and half note rests, because they're giving us places to breathe. Or I love in Lauryn Hill's Everything is Everything video, her shirt says Selah, which is, to pause and reflect on what's being said. And that's crucial for me. So I would, try to think of some rhythms that both work with and also create some moments of harmony and even tension to text paint what is happening in the poem. I also think of Samuel Coleridge Taylor, the Black British composer in the late 1800s, and how his life was changed by meeting the Fisk Jubilee singers on tour. Mm-hmm. And then his setting a bunch of poetry to music, his doing themes for Shakespeare's Othello, his setting Longfellow's Hiawatha to music as a way of protesting British incursion, British invasion of Africa by saying what the European Americans did to the Native Americans is happening right now in Africa and with the British, and his use of poetry set to music as this beautifully subtle and yet powerful kind of anti-imperialist protest. So I think there's a lot of power, Salika, and I love how you talk about adaptation, because those are those moments I don't know that we have the vocabulary yet to talk about those transferences unless we delve into like post-colonial theory and those ideas. But like, what happens when Led Zeppelin takes a blues song, a black blues song from the South, and they put it up an octave and they turn it into this rock anthem, and then Jamaican artists remix it in Jamaica? What happens with those cultural transferences, those transnational transferences? And to me, there's hopefulness there in how culture doesn't ever stay put in the boxes that the supremacists would want it to. It doesn't, can't, it won't.
I think the thing that supremacists fear the most is music and art and poetry. I look at people who are banning books today, and I look at the books they're banning. And a friend of mine just sent me a note saying that someone put God's Trombones by James Weldon Johnson on a banned book list. And I think of his poem, Go Down Death, which is, the God's Trombones is a set of sermons, but they're poetry, because sermons are poetry. The way Martin Luther King spoke in those rhythms were poetry. He turned Heidegger into poetry. And I think, how can you feel threatened by a poem telling death to go away and leave people alone? But they don't see the poem, they don't read the poem. All they see is the black artist. So maybe one of the most powerful things that white artists and black artists and red artists and yellow artists can do is to be in the same space so people can't ignore them. Because, that's what they want to do. I also think maybe one of the most powerful things an artist can do is sing out of or play out of genre. I think of Prince And the famous video where he's playing the lead at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction on My Guitar Gently Weeps. And until he comes out, the entire group was white. And it was very straightforward. And he comes out only as Prince can in a blazing red suit and a black shirt and a red fedora. And he's side-eyeing the guy who's playing the solo note for note. Lets him finish and then blisters into a finger-killing rock, probably one of the best finger-killing rock solos ever done. And throws the guitar up in the rafters. People are still trying to figure out where the hell that guitar went. Or I think of Prince and Lenny Kravitz, American Woman. Because the people who put people in boxes think of Prince and they think of R&B. I'm a guitar geek. I don't look like a guitar geek, but I'm a guitar geek. My house is filled with guitars. I have pedals hidden in places they shouldn't be. There's amps in places they shouldn't be. And I get those magazines. I get Guitar Geek magazines. My husband threatens to have bonfires with my magazines. But until Prince died, the only black person on those guitar magazines was Jimi Hendrix. It was like nobody else. I mean, there's Eddie Van Halen, who they didn't realize was half Thai. You know, he's multiracial. Occasionally you see Slash. But then Prince dies, and all of a sudden Eric Clapton is asked, well, who was the best guitarist ever? Who is it, you know, what does it feel like to be a guitar god? And he says, I don't know, as Prince. And all of a sudden people in the guitaros geek sphere discover Prince. Why does it take him moving out of their expectation for them to see him? I think Prince is one of those people who we place our expectations on. In the same way we don't expect to see a white guy singing soul, which you do. We don't expect to see a black guy playing rock guitar. It's 2021. Why are we still holding on to this? You're an artist. What do you feel like about that?
Yeah, I think back to what we were saying with bridges and interstitial spaces when you have collaboration. So Prince, who could play every instrument better than anyone else.
Yes, ever. Yes, Prince forever. This is the Prince field. You know, I'm sorry, it's Prince. Do not insult my heart. I married Ben, but he knows who.
It's true. Prince, who could play these instruments so incredibly well, and then has a multiracial band. And all of his bands, the family, all of the iterations, they're multiracial, and also choosing to remove those fixed notions of race, gender, and sexuality in his music. I think there's still a message there for us, and that's, he's one of the main people I think of. And also genre as well, genre as yet another box to tick. And in the 80s, Living Colour, Fishbone, Bad Brains, going from punk, rock, metal into flawless reggae and moving among these time signatures with such ease.
And difficult time signatures. People don't understand how hard it is to play reggae. To play the bubble, I mean, as a keyboardist, if I'm trying to practice and I don't have a bass player there, I'm dead. I need the bass player to hit the one, because I can't. I'm not. We in European history, we look for the one. We look for one, we look for three. You know, in kindergarten, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So when I came to Eau Claire, I saw people who couldn't hit the and. And there is still a certain joke in my house that we're looking at people clapping and going, oh God, they can't hit the offbeat. But it really is hard. It is very difficult to play reggae, far more difficult than people think. It's far more difficult to play metal than people think. Didn't mean to interrupt you, sorry, but had to throw that out there.
Yes.
Don't let a musician geek out, I'm sorry.
It's such a pleasure to be geeking out with you, Salika. I'm loving this and glad for this opportunity. And yes, the and the power of and, which is so important. The power of the and is
power of and runs again.
Is reggae music. It's the power of the and on that beat and right with what the drum is doing and the moving bass line and then the keys bubbling and the guitars chucking on that off beat, which becomes the on beat. That beautiful harmony, I think there is a lesson for all of us in there, and those artists who don't stay put in their genres. That's thrilling. Most Def's Black Jack Johnson, where he's working with metal. Those artists who just Kanye West, who pulls in every genre, including Justin Vernon's folk music, gets remixed in My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. So this idea, or Prince talking about how much he loves Joni Mitchell, moving beyond those limitations. The last time I saw Prince was at a Living Color show at the Dakota in the Twin Cities, and he was above the kind of back upper part was always where Prince was, the balcony, and he was with Candace Springs, who's now doing this amazing jazz music, and they were there to watch Living Color move through metal and funk and punk seamlessly, and Corey Glover screech almost as high as the amazing beyond high C soprano pitch capabilities of Prince's multi-octave range, and all of the destroying of notions of thinking of pitch in relation to conceptions of gender with regards to artists that entails. So yes, Salika, I think of all of these things as you're talking about bridges and adaptations, and also artists who bend genre and toy with the notions that these kind of boxes that forms in America want you to tick with regards to race, ethnicity, nationality, gender, sexuality, and even genre as a box that kind of radio stations tend to tick in their identifications. That to artists at that level, they're just a number of streams and tributaries to kind of one mighty river rushing to the sea.
I've always thought that what Prince was a Louisiana Creole jazz musician who chose to take the jazz idiom into, I guess, what we would call world music today. Because in the 80s, there was Michael Jackson and there was Prince. And people just don't realize how big Michael Jackson was and how big Prince was. I mean, one of my friends made me sit through Purple Rain, I think 6 times. And everybody had seen that movie, and everybody had that album. But Prince's roots were in the French Quarter. His father is a jazz musician, his mother is a jazz singer. and they come up from Louisiana to Minneapolis, to play and settle there. But I've always felt that he was settled in the Creole interracialism of New Orleans. And I always think of it in terms of the Richard Pryor quote. The white people look black, the black people look white, and everybody is crazy. And that, I kind of feel like that's why Prince didn't want to be captured. Because in the French Quarter, in Storyville, in the Creole quarters, black, white, indigenous, African, Irish, Italian, Korean. I mean, we have a dish, yakikan, that came from Korea, and black people got their hands on it and twisted it. From Korean War veterans coming back. I see Prince, and I think we're getting close to the end where we have to actually wrap this up. I see these artists and I see this music as the diaspora. We are the diaspora. And by diaspora, I mean outside, the people who are outside of their homeland, but they have to make a homeland. And music allows us to make a homeland. But music also allows us to see this glimpse of the beloved community in some ways. Maybe a glimpse of MLK's vision. Where do you see it go from here? Where do we go from here?
I have to quote Lauryn Hill in Everything is Everything. Sometimes it seems we'll touch that dream, referring to King, but things come slow or not at all. And the ones on top won't make it stop, so convinced that they might fall. Let's love ourselves, and we can't fail to make a better situation. Tomorrow, our seeds will grow. All we need is dedication. And I think in those lines, there's power. And I also think in what you're saying about diasporic identity and thinking about Paul Gilroy's idea of the Black Atlantic and these artists. In that same song, Lauryn Hill shouts out Cleopatra and Nefertiti and Serengeti. But this idea of diasporic identity and imaginary homelands, I think there's power in that, from the Rushdie essay of Imaginary Homelands, writing about exile, that it would be impossible to go back to these places, and yet forever in fictional and musical realms creating imaginary homelands. So I think of Kendrick's Compton, I think of Lauryn Hill's New Jersey and Manhattan, and Zion, the name of her child, as she's recording Miseducation, and Bob Marley's Zion, and Outkast's Stankonia, and Nelly's Nellyville. And
John Baptiste, anything by John Baptiste is that longing for home.
Yes.
Or a home the home we want that's not there anymore. Or the home we want to make. Black History Month is the home we want to make. This is our chance to at least try to see this vision, don't you think? Isn't this why we're here?
I couldn't agree more, Salika. And yeah, we create this home together, and we leave doors open and hand each other keys and have this notion of a shared place, and inside by the hearth, on the thresholds, what we see through the windows. So important. I think of Backwash, non-binary artist originally from Africa, now living in Canada, who has songs about the woods, and just like in the Scarlet Letter and in so many indigenous cultures, notions of the woods as the periphery as opposed to the center, and we can question even those names and assigning those identities to those places. But for Backwash, the woods is a place where they can be themselves, not in any of these other spaces. So the conjuring of these homelands, of these homes, of these spaces where authentic selves emerge, where we learn about ourselves and each other. I can't thank you enough for creating space through conversations in color for this to happen on a weekly basis, for creating places for people to listen, and for the honor of being here to talk with you and think about ideas. And it's so rare we get a chance to actually stop and talk and play music and collaborate together.
Next time we do this, we have to play.
Yeah, we need instruments.
We need instruments. We'll get Clay to play the bass.
Yes. Yes.
We will find a way. We will find a way. Happy Black History Month. Conversations in Color.
Thank you, everyone.